Hello everyone and welcome back to Inside ArtScroll, where the books you read and the people who write them come to life. Today we are joined by Rabbi Avrohom Biderman, longtime editor at ArtScroll, and Rabbi Chananya Kramer, president of Kol-Rom in Baltimore. Thank you to both of you for joining us today. We're here to discuss a mammoth project that ArtScroll undertook some years ago that is relevant now with the parshiyos of Truma, Tetzava, Kisisa, and so on, and that is the Mishkan project. Now, the project was comprised of two segments, and you'll discuss that. That's the DVD, which is an incredible accomplishment, and the book or sefer, the Mishkan. So I guess we'll start with Reb Chananya. I know you spearheaded the project on the DVD end. What was your role as far as this project is concerned?
First of all, thank you for having us. This is fun to
Pleasure.
talk about, even though it's a bunch of years later. Spearheaded, I think, is giving me too much credit. Okay. I think all the spearheading was the Rabbi Meir Zlotowitz, Zichrono Livracha, certainly his idea. Quickly, I'll go through some of the history from my end of it. It was about 2001. My business was very young at that point, and I was introduced to Rabbi Zlotowitz by my father-in-law, Rabbi Krohn, of course, of ArtScroll fame. And Rabbi Zlotowitz, after showing him some interactive CD-ROMs that I was doing at the time, he told me about a vision that he had to create the Mishkan that people could step through psukim and walk around inside the Mishkan. 2001, okay, he was way ahead of his time. Kedarka, he was thinking, he wasn't ready to do it, but back then, he was already planning for it. I always look at, like, when I think of him whenever the pasuk, Aviv Shomer es Hadavar. I was like that to him. He was just waiting for the right time for the technology to catch up to his ideas, and for, of course, the sponsor to make himself available. So for several years, it was in discussion, but it wasn't active. And as my operation grew and became possible to kind of undertake this kind of an endeavor, it wasn't until 2007 it became a reality.
So the project took off in 2007. What was your role, Rabbi Avrohom, in the DVD and in this book?
There were several aspects of both projects, but let's start with the DVD. First, there was the basic approach, research, what's pshat in the psukim? What do they mean? We have psukim. We have 5 parshiyos. It's very unusual that 5 parshiyos of the Torah should be virtually dedicated to one topic. It's very unusual. But for all that information, there's very little that we know, and there's very on the detail end. And we had to assemble a team of talmidei chachamim, and Rabbi Zlotowitz frequently says that we benefit from a genius cluster here. I'm not a genius, but
now please.
I was
Come on.
I was in charge of whipping the genius cluster together. So there was a matter of going through each pasuk in Truma and Tetzava and Kisisa that discuss the Mishkan, and understanding what pshat is. How are we going to present this? This meant, first we sat with Rav David Feinstein. I had the privilege, Zichrono Livracha, who was our guide in everything that we did. But I joined one of the famed breakfast meetings of Rabbi Zlotowitz and Rav David, and we discussed there a broad outline. We didn't know exactly what we were getting into, of how we would approach the scholarship, how we would approach the pshat. And then there was, Chananya partnered us with some great people, some modelers out in New Orleans.
Well, first we had the defense contractors who actually did work for Northrop Grumman and other kinds of people who had to create 3D models. Remember, you have to remember the time period. 3D modeling was not as accessible as
these 3D models were created physically or digitally?
Oh, digitally.
Oh,
yeah.
all digitally.
Everything is a digital model, but you have to think it has to be ausgehalten, right? When you talk about if you're creating a model of something for the defense.
You're studying the Chumash text and the Mefarshim, and you come up with an understanding of what one of the
it wasn't just me. Okay. Let's get that straight. We had Rabbi Avi Gold, who was a senior editor at ArtScroll for decades. He was one of the first editors at ArtScroll. Rabbi Menachem Zilber, who's one of our Gemara editors, and he's involved in many of our projects, and he's a fascinating, brilliant Talmud Chacham, and a fellow Rav Meir Goldstein, who's also an amazing Talmud Chacham. And every week we'd split up the material, and we'd meet at the end of the week to hash out how our understandings of all the details of each keli.
Were you then sitting down and literally sketching the pictures of the Aron and the Shulchan and the Mizbeach and so on?
I was sketching some things. We were doing a lot of dimensions. We were doing a lot of notes. There were a lot of notes about the details. For all the information that we know, there's so much information, like I said, that we don't know. We had to use a hierarchy of mefarshim for how we understand this. The goal was, and I think Chananya had to bring this to life on his end, was to show, and of course, when it came to actually producing the DVD, we enlisted Rabbi Shia Brander, ArtScroll's graphic genius. The goal was to show a simple, straightforward, accurate shot. We could have gone all over the place and turned this into an encyclopedia. There are encyclopedias on this topic. That wasn't our goal. Our goal was that people can understand the Chumash and Rashi. That was the goal. And that was our mission. Chananya put us together with these...
Now, these experts were not with a Jewish background, right?
Let's say they're not experts in the Mishkan.
Not experts.
They're not Jewish.
What was their reaction when you brought it to them?
But they did have a value and an...
Yeah, they also are Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, they all had some kind of context reference of the tabernacle and a respect for Old Testament.
Absolutely.
And I apologize by the Raiders of the Lost Ark, by the way, for all the people who are going to be calling. But they absolutely were excited about doing something that they recognized. And you're talking about all the scholarship. There was no secret as to how much was being invested in time and effort and expertise into this. And when you do that, you're going to get in kind. You get that kind of respect.
And they realized that you were trying to produce the authoritative production and volume on this topic, so that no one would ever have to do it again. Meaning that this was going to be done right. Right. And they understood that precision mattered.
Well, I remember we were sitting, Chananya was talking about, you asked about virtual, these weren't actually built. So I suggested I was down in New Orleans with Rabbi Brander.
So you actually traveled there?
I traveled to, Chananya traveled to New Orleans several times. I traveled myself to New Orleans several times. And I traveled with Rabbi Brander one time. And at the meeting, I made a joke about we should write that there were no trees cut down in the production of this DVD, of these models. And he points to this stack of a few thousand sheets. He goes, forests were cut down, just the notes, Just these notes, thousands of forests were cut down from the production of this DVD.
Yeah, you have to remember, it's not just that Avrohom and the others were just making sketches. They had to translate it into documents that these non-Jewish people would understand.
Here's an example. Hooks at the top of the support beams. So I had to give them...
Show for the camera.
We'll show the camera. Is this the camera? See this?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is an example. So you have to show them exactly. 5 feet post. We write how big the post is, and we gave them exactly
exact dimensions,
exact locations of every hook and everything else. This is just one piece of the puzzle. We had to give them every single detail, and they had questions sometimes. They had questions the
crown,
the filigree. Right. So we had to
his name. No, we had to.
It's a filigree.
There was a kufa. We were talking to Goyim for so long. We had to have names for everything that they would understand.
Right. So we used the filigree. A filigree is this like design. You can't tell them a crown because
it doesn't mean anything. It means nothing.
So it's 3 of the kelim: the Aron and the Shulchan and the Mizbeach Zav, the golden altar, all have crowns on them. Zer. So all those 3, we had to give them. They said, okay, what does it look like? So we had to find the design. Now, this is one of the frequently asked questions. This was an interesting thing. We picked a design, a random design, and we write that we don't know what it looked like exactly, of course. But we picked a random design, and the way that random design happens to be designed is that when they created the model, there's one piece floating. So people sometimes ask me, is that alpinase? Is this put down someplace? Is that miraculous? I said, no, that was just the design that we picked. And when they created the model, it's that
like
little...
It's like a luchais, just kind of hung in space there.
The average school child will tell you that the zer was a jagged edge, kind of triangle shape.
I think Batzal was better than that.
Yeah.
No, we actually had a reason. We actually had a reason for making it round.
Really?
The reason I made it round is because when they took the shulchan, the table in the Mishkan, had the lechem apanim on it. It had loaves on it. And those loaves, according to most opinions, were as two kohanim came in with a stack of breads on Shabbos, and they slid it onto the table, just alongside on the other side of the table were two kohanim pulling off the previous week's loaves. So if those loaves are being slid on, and they had to go over this zer, they were basically being slid on the zer. So if it would be a jagged edge, the breads would get caught on the zer and tear, and it would tear the bread.
I don't think I knew that. That's great.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And that's why we went with a round edge. So once we went the round edge there, we made all the zers round.
Because prior to this, almost every depiction I've seen of a zer was had a pointed edge. But according to what you're saying,
that's correct. And if you go to a museum, you'll find that king's crowns, they're round and there are jagged ones.
Right.
It's not an we find that
is that something you ran by Reb David?
We didn't run every detail by him. I can't remember if we ran this one by him. There are certain details that we don't call attention to, that we just present certain ways because they had to be presented somehow, and we had reason to present that way. This we did discuss with Rabbi David. He basically told us if there's no source for something, and that's the way you understand it, that's the way you should present it. Internally, we made a decision that we're not writing our book here. So we could have written another book explaining all the details and why we made every detail the way we did. But that it wasn't our place to put our Torah here. Right. There's a classic story when we began doing the ArtScroll Gemara. It's in the Rabbi Zlotowitz book. When we began doing the ArtScroll Talmud, so Rav Hersh Goldworm, Zechron Levracha, who was in charge, Rabbi Sherman had written something, and Rabbi Goldworm told him, that's a beautiful piece, but we're not writing our Torah, we're writing what the Mefarshim say, we're writing what the commentators say. So this wasn't a place for us to write our insights and our presumptions. We show it the way we understand it, and we don't call attention to it. And that rounded zer is a
good example of that. Right. Now, just chronologically, what came first, the DVD or the book? Did one feed off of the other? Was it done concurrently? Walk us through that process.
I like to say that it was histakel baraisa bara alma, that the DVD might have feels like it came first, but it's the book is really the product. I mean, that's in the way I look at it.
The DVD came first.
The DVD came first, right? Chronologically, answer your question.
The DVD came first.
So all the sketches and drawings.
We did the movie and then the book.
Okay.
If I may say so.
Yeah.
So
right. Yes, right. It's true. But the DVD is almost done like a visual book. The psukim are laid out, and you can kind of click through it. There's things that you can't do in a book on the DVD.
Right, Chananya, give our viewers, for those who haven't seen the DVD, just give them an idea of what it is. It's not just pictures of the Mishkan.
Some of your viewers have not seen this DVD.
I know it's hard to imagine, Chananya. Your productions have gone all over the world, but there are a few people who might not have seen it.
Yeah, thank you. The DVD was broken into three categories. We had verse by verse, that's what we called it. It was each pasuk that you could step through and be able to view the pasuk with the Rashi and the Chumash, translation from the Saperstein edition, right?
Right, and he did an incredible job on the interface because you could really get to any keli. There's an option to get to any keli, so you can get to those pasukim, or on top you can get to any pasuk on a keli. There's a little slider at the top.
Yeah, remind me, I want to get back to that slider thing. I have an anecdote I want to tell you. But just to answer your question, we did every pasuk by pasuk. Then we had a section of just finished video presentations that were narrated by Rabbi Sherman. Nosson Sherman explains, so you could watch it as a kind of a short film, the kind of the assembly of each keli. And then lastly, which was Rabbi Zlotowitz's dream, you'd be able to experience and walk through from that point of view, walking around and being able to navigate and look around inside the Mishkan.
Navigate. You were able to get up to the top of the Mizbeach.
Yeah.
Able to climb up.
Yeah, it is a pretty incredible experience.
And then Chananya had to build in a system where you wouldn't fall off the edge by mistake.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, it was actually a real discussion because Lamaisa, you want to keep the illusion alive that you're actually experiencing this thing. So if you walk up the ramp and you can be that kohen, right, that the Mishnah talks about breaking his leg, you're going to actually be able to fall off. But no, we actually did program it such that you couldn't fall off, and you couldn't also get burned, by the column.
You couldn't go into the fire, right?
Right, exactly. But it was essentially we were doing game programming because it's that first person. If you excuse the first person shooter, that's kind of weird. Where you're walking around and you're like, I'm not gonna. I'll stop there with the jokes. But at that point, that in 2007, programming by hand was interesting. We were using a programming language called Lingo programming because that was macro for all the for all you techies out there that are going to be interested in this, this was Macromedia owned the software before Adobe bought Macromedia. Macromedia had a program called Macromedia Director. Director had its own programming language called Lingo. This is a very specific kind of sugya. The guy who wrote Adobe's manual on the programming language, we hired to do the programming for the walkthrough.
Chananya,
Wow.
Chananya
No, there was a guy in
Ottawa.
Ottawa, thank you. I was going to say Quebec, Ottawa. Yes, and he was in Ottawa, and I went there a bunch of times. We worked with this programmer, the Velt's expert on this language, and he coded by hand a game style thing in 2000.
And again, this is 2007. People don't appreciate.
This is 13 years ago, before
14
so
years
many
ago.
of the advances that we take for granted.
Today, you would be licensing a gaming engine and you would be repurposing it, just for those other people who understand what that means. But to do it by hand was a monumental avoided to program it.
The infrastructure didn't exist, and not only that, you have to write it, you have to do it in a way that the very limited average computer PC, the average PC user, would be able to use it.
That's right.
That was another limitation that we had. The computing power that people had was very, very small, very slight compared to today.
That's right.
Right.
And people don't understand it. They forget very quickly, or they were born after that, and they don't understand.
And the time changed. Like that programming language does not exist. It's not the pshat that it's hard. It doesn't exist because they bought the software and they phased it out. So. Yeah, it's challenging.
That's
keeping
amazing.
up with software is an avodah. So.
And I think you mentioned that you had a programmer in Russia, if I'm not mistaken, as well.
We had
modelers.
outsourced.
The modelers.
You had outsourced. The modelers?
The fellow in New Orleans was dealing with people in the Ukraine and Russia.
Sure.
So there were language.
From New Orleans to Ukraine to Russia
and
to
ultimately,
Ottawa, this was a global project.
We had local people ultimately in Baltimore also.
Right, that was later on. That was the next step.
Yeah.
But the first step was really the modelers in the Ukraine and Russia, where we didn't go. And maybe Chananya got there, but I did not go to Ukraine or Russia.
Yeah, and there was no Zoom then either, so it was like, yeah.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
We actually did have a screen sharing software that we used.
We did. We used LogMeIn or one of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Whatever was
available in those days.
Yeah.
I think there was even one by Bigdei Kehunah. I don't know if we were
Could be.
back then. It was rough.
Wow.
There was more to it than that, because every step of this, the digital modeling of this, you have to understand. Let's get to the urios, the curtains. So we had to give them a PMS color based on the mefarsha, based on the discussions all over the place about what the colors of these threads were. We approximated what's called a PMS color. We gave them a color and we said this thread is going to be this color. And then you take the threads were woven of 6 little cords. They took 6 cords, they created 6 cords, and they
digitally wove.
Digitally.
They digitally spun the thread. Wow. They eventually spun the cord, and then they wove. Then they spun the different colors together, and then they actually wove the fabric. We
were like mimicking the real thing.
Mimicking the real thing.
Yeah.
Not only mimicking the real thing, we didn't believe that the color that they achieved, the basic background color, was the way it would appear from a distance. So Rabbi Brander, so I went to a trimming store and I bought yarn of those 4 colors, or approximately those 4 colors, and Rabbi Brander and I stood in his office and we're
weaving,
we're spinning. We're spinning threads that are like this.
People do not stop this kind of thing. How much goes into this kind of process?
We needed to be accurate. When we did the walkthrough, there were some technical questions physical questions that they had that are not addressed anywhere. Just let's remember, the Mishkan was the Mishkan, the Beis HaMikdash was the Beis HaMikdash. When the Rambam discusses Beis HaBchira, when the Gemara, you find a line in the Gemara sometimes about other topics. My dahava, it doesn't make a difference. We're not discussing this because this is something that was and is not going to happen again. That is the case with the Mishkan. We don't have many details of how things were in the Mishkan, because the Mishkan was specific to that time and place. And once the Beis HaMikdash was built, they had windows, they had we know a lot more about the Beis HaMikdash, certainly about the second Beis HaMikdash. So they asked us, where's the light come from in the Mishkan? And we didn't have the answer. The ashan, the smoke of the ketores, rose up to the top, we're told, and then it spread along the ceiling. Where does it go?
No ventilation system.
No ventilation system.
We had an issue with the flooring also because the anan was beneath.
Right, we had an issue. That was when in the videos specifically became an issue.
You're walking on a marshmallow.
They were showing you're walking on the clouds. You're literally walking on clouds, walking on air. So it was really an incredible. It was the dynamic of taking everything and making this real. Added so many layers of questions.
Unbelievable.
That really.
That's right.
Well, one of the issues I'm sure you grappled with was color, because every keli and every one of the Bigdei Kehunah, you have to depict the color accurately. But what's blue and what's purple and what's gold, and there's light gold, and it depends on the lighting, it depends on the vantage point. So each of you, how did you deal with it on the DVD, and how did you deal with it in the book, or at the same time?
I remember as we were,
Right, this was a big issue. No,
I just remember when we were making that, when we did the first draft of a model, right? So when you're showing it, when we're discussing it, you're only getting one particular angle. But when gold moves, it catches the light. That's when you see the grandeur of gold color.
Right. Otherwise, it looks like a yellow or something.
Right. It look like
yellow,
a yellow,
orange,
white gold, yellow gold.
No, besides that, there's no reflection when there's.
There's no detail on like the sides of the arm is completely smooth.
Right.
So visually, you're doing like the Kruvim's wings. You get to have all that detail.
Well, speaking of the Kruvim, what did you decide to do as far as the face of the Kruvim?
So originally, we made a boy and a girl.
Which we know Chazal say that the
Karavia.
face of right.
Right, Karavia. And that's
I really
the
wanted to
basic
be my kids.
understanding.
I wanted to put my kids on the face.
You really-
I really did.
Really?
But we didn't do that. We took generic stock photo boy and girl, and we dropped them in there. And then, at the very, very last stages of production,
Sad story.
Chananya still can't. Chananya still.
I'm still talking to my therapist about it.
Chananya's still traumatized by this. Rabbi Zlotowitz said, the Kruvim were really too holy for us to show the faces. So Chananya had to digitize. You had to put like a
We put them into witness protection.
So you blurred it.
Yeah, we blurred out
It's
their.
not a blur.
Well,
It's not a blur.
we obstructed their faces. Most of the time, we actually
Pixelized.
showed.
Based on
Well,
angle,
we
based
actually
on
we
angle.
rendered it
Right.
such that the Kruvim's,
That's in the book, but in the program,
DVD,
program where you
go
spin it
around.
around.
it's digitized,
Constructed,
and it was a programming feed as well.
It was challenging, but really, it was just more sad than anything else because they are magnificent.
Right.
But you still get the wings, and you still
Yeah, but just like to have to cover anything that you work, whatever. But Rabbi Zlotowitz, I remember him telling me also, it was pain. It was, we wanted to show Klal Yisrael what this is, but there's just, you can't show the face of a crew.
Now, did you guys have, not guys, talmidei chachamim, did you have something to work off of as far as a template of different sefarim, other things that had come out prior to this volume?
As far as the illustrations, we ignored all previous form.
Okay.
As far as the scholarship,
I remember growing up, we had the Tabernacle.
Right.
It was this beautiful book, beautiful
These
pictures.
were photos of actual physical models that somebody
Physical models that someone
Right.
made, but apparently it wasn't up to par as far as the scholarly standards
one
that
of
you
the
were looking for.
one of the great questions somebody in the office asked at the time when we were doing this, when he saw the shulchan. So I believe the shulchan is on the cover of that book,
Right.
And there are trays to hold the bread.
the cover is
And he
trays.
asked
Yes, I
me
remember that.
where the trays are. I said there were no trays. If you learn Rashi and the Rambam. Now there were trays, but they weren't on the table. They were not when they put the bread on the table. It was just bread. There were half pipes between the breads, but
held the bread in place.
that they are actually to add some air between the loaves so that they wouldn't get spoiled. The Gemara tells us. So again, everything is the Torah of this is not only Rashi and Chumash. There are suyas all over Shas. Because to get back to your gold issue, so or the colors issue, there are many Rashis and many other places that discuss the colors, the tcheles and other things. Klal Yisrael has assumed it's purple. There are those that say it's some other color. Klal Yisrael assumed that it's purple. I saw it this morning on the research also says it's purple. So they claim that the Vilna Gaon holds it's pink. I don't know, but Klal Yisrael always assumed it was purple. The Ramban, in discussing the Bigdei Kehunah, and because as we went through things, we used to refer to ancient garments, ancient structures.
Historical references.
Right, historical references. So what gave us a right to do that? So you see that Rashi, when he discusses the ephod, discusses the apron worn by hashovua women, distinguished women when they go riding. Or the Ramban in the Bigdei Kehunah discusses what royalty wore in his times. So that gave us license to refer to actual historical clothing and actual historical details of what was happening, what they did in palaces and things like that. There was a guiding principle that this had to be l'chavod l'sefaris. Everything had to be magnificent. It couldn't look strange. You sometimes look at sketches that people make of the Kalim and things like that, and they just look odd.
Right.
It's not likely that they looked odd. And this is something that we discussed with Rav David. There's a certain symmetry that we were looking for. Again, a balance, because it had to look majestic. It had to look awe-inspiring. And Chananya had to make it look awe-inspiring, but we had to decide what it looked like to make it awe-inspiring.
He had the hard job. Then get it wrong, and then get it wrong, and then get it right.
Seven people tzaddik v'kam.
Oh, 7, yeah, that's...
7 was an easy
that's
one.
optimistic.
Those are the good ones, right? So really, the golds. The Gemara in Yuma, the Mishnah in Yuma discusses the golds that were used on Yom Kippur as opposed, and which kalim were different colors of gold. So yeah, we had something to go by, and these things are discussed. You just have to find them, and it's just spread all over the place, and that's why we had a team really assembled that we'd go through each thing. There were some imponderables, shall we say. But again, we tried our best, and we hope we got it right. We didn't have the benefit. Betzalel, it says, was Betzel Kel. Right. He was in God. He was in the shadow of God, and he knew the deep concept. Says Yodei Haya Betzalel L'Tzaref Ha'Osia Shabayim Nivru Shamayim V'Aretz. That God, he knew how to combine the letter formations that God used to create the world. We don't have that. We didn't have
next best thing, Rabbi Brander, but still.
Well, let's not.
Listen, you had a fabulous team.
I don't want to be irreverent, but we relied on the Mefarshim, the gedolei Mefarshim. We have a hierarchy even of how we did things. There was Rashi on Chumash, Rashi on Gemara, the Gemara itself, the Rambam, and then there's a sefer called Ma'aseh Choshev by Rabbi Emanuel Chayriki, who was a Mekubal in Eretz Yisrael several hundred years ago, who has a fascinating sefer with a pirush. There's also the Melech Mishkan, which was Reb Chaim Kanievsky's pirush. We had all those things, but that was all part of Chazal. And then as we went down, we generally went with Ma'aseh Choshev, if there was no earlier another topic that people. This is something that we added. Rashi seems to say that the curtains at the front of the Mishkan that closed the center of the courtyard were in line with the curtains of the courtyard. There's another sheet in the Gemara, in the Chazal, I think it's Bryce Lasa Mishkan, that was 10 amas out. And many models have a 10 amas out. Mm-hmm. But so we show that as well, that second sheet, because it is a well-known Chazal. Generally, we don't show alternates unless there is a discussion that Rashi, brings down, or that it's on that Rashi, right there, brings down two opinions in the Gemara. But
the famous one with the Menorah, right? Al-Aqsain.
Right. How to understand that.
So what did you do?
We showed both. We showed both. We have a little note explaining the background of both opinions. What's fascinating is that if you ask people today, what the Rambam held and what Rashi held, I'll tell you that Rashi held was rounded, and the Rambam holds it was straight. Ma'aseh Choshev, who says the Rambam says it's rounded, and Rashi says it's straight. It's a fascinating.
I think archaeologically, we found also the coins always had
everything. Everything had it rounded. I don't want to go into that. This is not that. This is not the place for that discussion. That's a whole sugya b'fnei.
Well, as I stepped into that one, I guess.
But another interesting thing was the kiyar.
Yes. We know nothing about
that.
We know nothing about the kiyar.
We know it's mentioned in Parshas Kisisa.
The laver, as I seem to remember.
The laver.
The laver. Okay, just whatever we translated that one. I don't know.
That's what it was. That's what it's called.
Yeah, okay.
Even in our Stone Chumash, that's what it's called, I believe.
When Chananya went to yeshiva, they called it the kiyar.
Yeah, exactly right.
So we're told it's a pot, and it had a base, and Tosfos says that the base had a base kibble. So we
put a spigot on it also. Was that right?
Yes.
That was the question, right?
It has to have a spigot. Now the question is,
how did they stop the water?
How did they stop the water? So when we did the book originally, and in the DVD, this is not addressed at all. After we came up with the first printing of the book, my brother-in-law calls me up. He says he was learning it with his son, and he says, "How did they stop the water?" I said, that's a very good question, because nobody discusses it.
Basically, what we know is there was a spout,
right,
but there was nothing to stop the water from just emptying out.
So nobody really discusses it. We couldn't find any place that discusses it. Yes, we know that in the Beis HaMikdash, it was a muchni lakir, it was a whole different dynamic. It was a whole different, but in the Mishkan, how did the water stop? We don't know. We actually added a note that says we don't know how the water stopped.
Uh-huh. Interesting. So as far as the timeline is concerned, you said that the idea was broached by Rabbi Zlotowitz 2001. 2007, you start working on this. How long did it take to come to fruition?
Felt like 17 years. No. No, we had it.
I think we started, and I suspect we maybe even started at the end of 2006.
It could be, yeah. It could be, because it was
a long process.
Yeah. It was a long process, and I think we wanted to have it done by the summer of 2008, but it was done in time for the Hanukkah sales of 2008.
Yeah.
So that's a year and a half or so of intensive.
Well, remember, because it was a slow burn of research, of like discussions until active production began. So
and then there were the many phases post-production. When they make a model, when they make a three-dimensional model, they're essentially just making a white object.
White, colorless, right? The point is
it's a colorless object. It's a wire frame. It's a wire form.
It's just the geometry of something.
Right.
It's very hard for people to understand, but if you just imagine a sugar cube, that would be. If people
That's what it looks like, right?
If people know what a sugar. If people still know what a sugar cube is.
That's good, Marshall. Yeah, no, it's true. You imagine just kind of an abstract shape that has no definition other than the geometry we give it. So we were working at it in the abstract in terms of when you're talking something so visual like this.
And then, the building the models accurately was step one, applying the right textures to them, the wood and the gold, and even the color of the thread. Well, the color of the thread that they built in actually somehow. I don't know how they did that, but they did that right away. But
probably cheated.
What?
Probably cheated on that one.
Could be.
Don't tell anybody. It's not public, right?
No.
But
only a few tens of thousands of people, of course.
It's fine.
But after the textures are done, at that point now we have to start creating the
photographs.
Yeah, that's right. And those are not photographs, right? They're renderings. They're the computers to set up. You have to position it. You have to add your virtual lighting, where it's going to go, how it's going to spill over.
And then you need to edit those photos, right? I want to give credit where credit is due. Was that done by Rabbi Brander, Rabbi Eli Kron? I know they were involved.
Rabbi Eli came in on the book.
On the
Sefer. But Rabbi Brander was really, he has an eye for detail and he has an eye for beauty. And I remember we'd be sitting there and he goes, no, zoom out, zoom in, move the light here, turn it a little bit this way, turn it a little that way. We wanted to get the perfect, of course, when you're dealing when you're getting with the 360-degree models, that's one thing. But there's an essential picture, each pasuk has an essential picture or sometimes several pictures on the DVD. Right. So that essential picture, which is not a rotatable model, and even the rotatable model has to be lit so that you can bring out what you're seeing, but the essential model had to look like a photograph.
That's right.
And
it has to be gehalten in terms of the perspective. So
right.
What's your focal length of your shot? Do you want to be close up to it, or are you holding a long lens from far away? Because that's the perception of how we're going to imagine a keli.
Right.
And if the mizbeach, if you're looking at any kind of a cube, your sugar cube mushel, right? So the back is going to could be narrower than the front,
right?
Because that's only if you're close up to it. Or if you're further away, it's not. But we don't want to mislead people that it wasn't a perfect square.
Right.
So this was a tremendous amount of work by Rabbi Brander, making Chananya and his team.
Educating us.
Educating you.
Yeah,
yes,
for real. That's true.
Yes, it was a real.
It was
a real process. I think this was the first real project that you did of this magnitude.
Oh yeah.
Or even of this real.
No, yeah.
The 3D.
We were pushing for sure. The 3D was this was more significant than anything. Yeah, this was just a bigger project.
Right. But there were rendering farms. Today we have computing power that the average PC could probably render a picture. In those days, you'd send out an image and it would be 8 hours. He sent it out to a professional place that had tons of computers linked together. I don't know how many, dozens of computers linked together that would work overnight or 8-10 hours to render a single image.
Really? Wow.
And then decide if we want to go back and do it again.
Right. Right. It was really a, I would say painting. But it was really exhilarating on the one hand. But it was really a very.
It was truly cutting edge, and people like to throw that around. But it really was. I'm saying
we pushed the limits of technology on this.
And the truth is that it stood the test of time because there's nothing.
People ask me about the technology moving on.
Yeah.
The models, all that research, the models don't go bad.
Right.
The technology just takes advantage of that same exact geometry and all that scholarship and the lighting and the textures.
It may be easier to do today, but
we can apply them maybe more easily today. But the work is. Things like 3D printing, which now people take for granted.
Right.
You can take 3D printing was not a thing
Didn't exist.
It didn't exist. Certainly not on a consumer level. Maybe commercially. No, it really didn't
Defense
exist.
Department, maybe.
Yeah, so I remember at that time of the Mishkan, we all think when we were children, we built models of the Mishkan ourselves back in 5th grade. It was so here. How exciting would it be to actually? This is sub-millimeter. So I had this idea, like let's take some of the kalim, let's take maybe the arin, and we'll print it in 3D. We'll gold plate it. Maybe we'll give it as a gift to the donor. Why not? Like it would be such a nice thing to have. I figured we're going to get a desk ornament. You could put mints inside and call it the 10 Commandments. And it would be, right?
He couldn't resist.
He
cannot resist.
ArtScroll does not take responsibility for that report.
It's important to have a great desk ornament. Anyway, so, I mean, it was expensive, and I told Rabbi Zlotowitz, and he thought initially, wow, that is a great idea.
And I blew the whistle on it.
So Avrahom's a party pooper. He went ahead, we asked Shilas, okay, as of course the right thing, kids don't try this at home. You ask a Shilah, and you don't do that. We do not build the kalim of the Mishkan. We do not 3D print them.
Not to scale.
Not to scale. Even though I thought it's miniaturized, it's not an amma.
Right.
Yeah. And I actually, on my own, I really wanted a header. I was like popping around. No, you cannot. It's just don't go down that road.
Right.
But the Kleinman edition of the Mishkan came out in English,
right.
And I should just mention for our viewers that it was then released in Hebrew, which is beautiful. This is the full size.
We actually had the English in full size, and then we made the English in compact size.
It's a little bulky, but it's really magnificent.
No, Eli Kron.
And was this done simultaneously?
No,
was it
no.
put out later, right?
Yes. As we said, ArtScroll tends to do things. We did a Hebrew Talmud before we did an English. We did an English Talmud before we did a Hebrew Talmud. Most people translate from English to Hebrew.
Can you see the picture?
Yeah, you can see just how stunning it is.
If you open up to a page there, I'll tell you one of the brilliant things that we had to do, that Eli Kron was able to achieve with Rabbi Brander, and open up to a page there. Any page.
Yeah, I'll say.
No, open to a page with text.
Oh.
Okay, they have text.
That's good?
Yeah.
Okay.
What page is that?
That's page 82.
Good. So if you look at the English page, as soon as I find it, hope I'm going the right direction. Good. So you have a pasuk with translation, you have Rashi with translation. We actually did a translation of Rashi there, an original translation of our Saperstein Rashi into Hebrew, a little of these psukim. But the pages align exactly. Eli Kron worked very hard to create a design where we can match page for page. Page 82 and page 82.
So page 82 in the Hebrew and page 82 in the English are exactly the same.
Yes.
Which is not always so easy considering the language difference.
Right, I'm saying.
And all the other challenges.
I'm saying just basically, even with just the translation and the Rashi translation is much longer. There's a translation here of the pasuk.
That's interesting.
So people can learn it together. One can even if they have different versions. That's great.
Right.
Amazing.
Wow.
So
that's really incredible.
So, this took an incredible amount of work
because an example of what you're talking about.
Because the high res, right? Here's an example of the threads. Can you guys see this?
Yeah,
can you zoom in on this?
You can see in the screen there. You can.
So here you have. They actually took six strands. They wove each strand into a thread, and that thread was woven into a yarn.
And that's what I'm looking at is a digital image.
It's a digital image,
which is incredible because it looks real.
Right now, when you look at this background color, this is what we didn't believe you'd get. So Rabbi Brander and I went ahead and actually took these and wove them together, and we got a very similar color to this.
Speaking of the lion on the parshiyos there.
Yes.
How do you know what a lion looked like?
Okay, it's a good question. So this harks back to the earlier discussion about you go to historical artifacts, and you look at ancient Roman or pre-Roman designs that they had. The Gemara tells us, and we're not sure if there's a question if it's an example or it's actually it that one of the methods of weaving was where you had Maaseh Choshev, was where you had a lion on one side and an eagle on the other side of the same cloth, woven in, using the same threads. That was a real masterful talent. That was called Maaseh Choshev.
Right.
So we went ahead and found old lions and old eagles. We also looked for designs that had some similar elements in their structure, so that if they'd be back to back, some of the threads would essentially sort of line up. And that's what we applied to these. We didn't have them actually weave those in like they did in the Mishkan. Those they just applied on. Right. We cheated on that. But So we went back to using, again, we discussed this with David, and this was obviously something that was, it's obvious in the Rishonim that we had a right to do that, but obviously we don't do things on our own. So we ask shaylos and we get guidance.
Now you've definitely done a tremendous service for Rabbeim, talmidim, anyone studying these parshiyos hashovua. But in the world we live in today, we think in terms of apps and things like that. Are there any ideas in both of your minds as far as where you could take what you've done and even take it further? Almost like a Mishkan app.
Just your first point, just in terms of with the Rabbeim using it, I Baruch Hashem have the shuls of going into a lot of classrooms. I do videos for a lot of schools. And when I come in these weeks and the Rabbeim are using the DVD on their smart
projector,
because it's absolutely such a nachas. Like, I just want to stop everything and say, guys, I was involved in making this. That would be completely inappropriate. But to answer your,
but he does that anyway.
Yeah, right. But as we mentioned earlier, the models themselves, no matter what happens with technology, right, as it grows, that's the medium. But the media, which is our kalim and the research and all the scholarship, that does not go bad, and it could be repurposed. And halavai, I think that as technology gives us another delivery platforms, of course there's more room for this. Of course there should be. Somebody should absolutely step up. I think for me to say, but I think
you think there is something that
there's
could
a lot
be done.
Can be done. I believe no one's going to make a book like this. No one's going to be able to. No, this can't be outdone.
Right.
But the technology side of it, sure, we recognize the reality of technology moves on.
Mm-hmm. One of the challenges that we had in doing the book was when we have the DVD Chananya produced, it is very clear what's going on. You don't have to explain everything. I think you referred to this a little bit earlier. When we came to the book, we had to distill everything black on white in words that people are going to read. And there were many more images here than there are on the DVD because we had to explain what was going on, point by point by point. There's a machlekes in Rashi, so you have to explain it. It's not enough to just show it. A picture's worth 1,000 words.
Right. You think that's where a book is harder than a DVD because you can't.
We had to write
it's interesting.
Yeah.
We had to write the thousands of words that the pictures spoke of on the DVD. We had to write them here.
The book is harder, and
it's more challenging.
The written word is forever, and software moves on.
Right.
Any final words from either of you about this project, about what you would want people to know was invested into this?
I don't know. Personally, it was such a shuls to be able to do anything that becomes kind of the definitive work on something, right? Which I'm not to throw shade on any of the sefarim that have been written in the past hundreds of years, but this to become now the source for people to teach and learn these sugyas, personally, has been a highlight.
It was certainly an incredible shuls for me. Again, I was just the coordinator, I guess you would say, in charge of putting everything together, and there were a lot of angles to this. There was the scholarship, there was the modeling, there was the coloring, there was the rendering. Right? Render was very heavily involved, even sometimes on the scholarship end. When you had a concept, and we thought we had different options of how to translate that into a sketch, and I'd be sitting at the meeting. We'd call him into the meeting, and he would. And Eli Krohn's contribution to this can't be overstated in producing a work that's really beautiful, and nothing. It's really a tremendous. I think it was tremendous for all of us. But speaking for myself, it was overwhelming shuls, as Chananya said.
Yeah, there's no question.
To do something that's used year after year, and it's used in classrooms all year very often. But I hear it from Rabbeim all the time. I hear it from friends. I hear it from other people. People like, you really wrote that?
Yeah.
So I don't know if I really wrote it, but it has my name on it, I tell them.
yeah. But I do feel like this whole project, the DVD and the book, it's a living vision. It's a legacy of Rabbi Zlotowitz to me, because this was always his baby he wanted. He visioned, and I mentioned I wanted you to remind me about an anecdote, just not to minimize his involvement. He was extremely, extremely involved in this process. I mean, I would be doing monthly reports, and he would be reviewing all the details. In the meetings, he was always present.
We'd be sitting in the conference room, and he would be watching until you got that interface just the way he wanted.
I was going to say, I don't know if you remember this, Mike. So we were all there. It was a large group of people, and there was a design question. The design was, there are, I forget how many, there was probably 70, 80 psukim across Truma Tetzaveh that are negate that we have images for. Whatever, however many, maybe it's over 100 actually. And how do you create an interface that people can easily jump to a pasuk and be visually understandable to go? So we're going to do a drop down. It seems all very kind of kludgy the whole way you're going to navigate the system. So I had this kind of like vertical lines representing every pasuk that you could roll your mouse over, and it would pop up and say what pasuk is was, but didn't just seem to do it. So there's a lot of times I remember he was sitting there saying, look, I was going to make a suggestion, but you guys are the artists, and he's being very machni himself. So why don't you just put the atechaim on each side of the lines, and this way you'll understand that you're looking at an open Torah, and that's where each vertical line represents.
You put a parchment background behind.
Really kind of simple but brilliant ideas that completely solve the problem.
Right.
And then I remember he told me afterwards, he was like he wasn't trying to step on any process, and then with that he left it was just like this gem of an idea. Remember because he was a masterful artist himself.
Sure.
That was his background. He has such a visual. So there was a lot to learn from all the people in this process.
But I think that it represents him in a much greater sense, in that his vision from 45 years ago when he wrote Megillas Esther. I was alive and well then, and I knew Jewish. I was young. I was a kid. I was a teenager, but when Megillas Esther came out, what he did was he took contemporary fonts. He took Judaism, Jewish publishing, from simple, basic fonts and black and white, essentially, covers, or a colored cover with black type, or pretty boring covers. And all of a sudden, here's a sefer with contemporary fonts, contemporary type, contemporary writing, full color cover. And he really took all the technology of 1975, 1976, and created a sefer out of it. And I think that this project, the DVD, represents that vision of taking all available technology and making it real and making it available, using it, harnessing it to teach Torah. And that is why I think this represents so much. He was way ahead of his time, but represents that vision of taking those resources, taking that technology.
You said, it's like a microcosm of what Rabbi Zlotowitz saw as far as the opportunities are concerned, what we could do.
Well, he took what was out there and knew how to harness it and how to use it to teach Torah and spread Torah. And I think that's why the DVD certainly, and even the model, the sefer, represents so much of that vision, because it was really visionary.
Well, both of you did a magnificent job taking that vision and bringing it to fruition. And in Mirz Hashem, we should be Zaycha B'Karev to Bias HaMashiach and Binya Beis HaMikdash. And who knows, maybe they'll tap into your talents. I mean, you've been there, you've tried it, you've done it.
Well, it'll come down built, I believe Rashi says, but we'll find out all the mistakes we made.
Exactly. But thank you again. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your memories, going down memory lane a bit about this magnificent project, and continued atzlacha to both of you in your respective avodas hakodesh. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Hissiger. Thank you, Chananya.